Yeah, and I also think the capability of retailers has grown.
But Four Corners was having a go at Bunnings.
The program explores claims that Bunnings uses its market power to stifle competition.
So we want you to tell us the backstory.
I think that ABC episode was pretty one-sided and struggled to give a balanced view.
The traditional, so the whole thing is a creative act to be able to actually sort of keep themselves relevant.
You know, the need to create a brand is often to fill a void.
That private brands, own brands, whatever you call them, private label, are not really proper brands. Shane, I'm interested also to get your view on Australia. How do we rate internationally in terms of being really good at private label?
He's an expert consultant in brand and brand development, and he's a master at taking a strategy, using brand thinking, using brand creative, and creating market advantage. Introducing Shane Lipton.
Welcome to Brandr. This is where we bring the power of brands to make businesses more successful. We've told you before that we'll be interviewing some really, really interesting guests, touching on some really interesting topics and areas of brand. And I think the most important principle was it's got to be relevant. It's got to be something that's happening now. And I just want to welcome our guest today, Shane Lipton.
Thank you, Roy.
Shane has had a career in retail and in branding over a couple of decades, and the story we're going to be talking about today is actually quite a big development in branding. And I'll just start by just going back 4 weeks ago, Shane. I was watching Four Corners on the ABC, and the company that you were working with and we're part of the foundation of being Bunnings is a household name. I'm there every day. Couldn't get a better brand. But Four Corners was having a go at Bunnings because they were exercising market power, they were not honouring their price promise. And there was this whole story about, you know, the household name we know that does all the good things, has the sausage sizzles, gives money to charity. Some questions came up about the brand of Bunnings.
Well,
and you were there at the time. So we want you to tell us the backstory. At the time you were there, Bunnings was the brand, but the beginning of private brands was really the important point that I wanted to talk about today. And Richard, you've known Shane through that journey, right? Maybe you can just give us a little bit of a perspective on what you know about Shane, and then we're going to hand it over to you, mate, to actually just talk us through the whole journey that you went through at Bunnings.
I think this is also great because this talks to about the relationships that client and consultant have and the importance of that. Shane walked into our office a few years ago now and had this great idea about going to Bunnings with home brands. He already had the client, and what he was looking for was an agency that could actually help bring your vision and your commitment to your client, which was Bunnings, to life with the strategies of home brand. It was we had an amazing journey together for a couple of years and developed this incredible suite of brands and stories, and really I think worked in partnership, very much in partnership as for our mutual client, which was your client, but with Bunnings. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about that journey that we went on.
With pleasure. But in response to Roy, I think that ABC episode was pretty one-sided and struggled to give a balanced view of what Bunnings were doing. Bunnings is a very authentic, honest and earnest business. To suggest that their home brand is a sort of a camouflage of being disingenuous about giving consumers value is a bit misleading. So I thought that was a bit of a hit job on Bunnings. But to go back a bit, I was engaged many years ago to look at their brands. And I think Bunnings had already acquired BBC, so this is going back a fair bit of time. And Bunnings were not in the home brand business. They were very much about leading consumer brands, whether it was a Dulux or a Hills or Boral or Obi or Black & Decker, or there was a number, more than a handful of very well established home improvement brands, and as a result of their acquisition, they'd inherited a number of more brands they were comfortable with. Some of them were just packaging solutions for an import program. So my remit was to review what they had with the view of rationalising it and, reducing them. Yet they still had aspirations to increase their imports, and imports can help a retailer hit price points and give customers exceptional value. So, and of course, if you're importing a product, it needs a packaging solution and a brand and an identity. As a result of the work I did, I sort of drew the conclusion that rather than reduce the brands, if they didn't want to be in the business of house brands or controlled label or home brands, they needed more of them. And at the time, that was probably not what they asked me to do, but it was the right thing. And to Bunnings' credit, we went on a journey to execute that. And the rationale being that if you have a brand that starts to straddle multiple categories or departments, it appears to be a private label or a home brand, and it's the way it's executed becomes quite bland because it's got to work over in that bay and work over in that bay and work over in that bay. So my recommendations were to have a whole suite of brands operating at different levels of, whether it was entry price point or mid-level, that could operate in much smaller territory, whether it's a bay or 2 bays or 3 bays or a small segment or department. And that way, that brand could create a bit of a personality and a story, and it could take on the category language of a particular category, where one category might be very functional, others might be more fashion-oriented or design-oriented. How can one brand service those things? So we ended up 20 or 30 odd brands, and many of them are endured there now. And my role was to create the strategy behind them. So we ended up ultimately working with Richard and creating a story for each, an authenticity around it. What was the reason? So we wrote stories about every brand. We made them up, but they needed to have a reason for being. And then we worked with Richard's team on finding a name, and then not all names were registrable, so they had to be registered, and then the name needed to match what we were after. Now, of course, with AI, that'd be a lot easier to do today, but back then there was copywriters, and this was quite a skill. And then we, through Richard, then ended up with a whole suite of pretty extensive style guides, because these style guides were going to be used in multiple different countries by people whose language wasn't, English may not have been their first language, so they had to be quite prescriptive. So as a result of that, we executed, registered the brand, and for all intensive purposes, many of these brands are not seen as home brands. Some of them are pretty simple packaging solutions, but others took on leadership roles in their category.
I think on that, Shane, you mentioned the development of the story and the brand package that goes with the story, but importantly, it was create longevity for the brand, grow the brand, despite maybe changes in the organisation, etc. It had an authenticity to it, so that it had a personality, and then it had a value in the Bunnings chain of purchasing and finding products, etc. And they became well known and almost become traditional. The stories gave the brands a heritage. And then we took those stories and designed each graphic outcome as being a separate entity in its own right, then recognisable by the customer as a true brand. And the fact that what it did was, in a way, create that dimension across the brands, as you said before, for Bunnings, that gave them these different levels.
It's all just listening to you talk there, and to you as well, Richard. I think there's a perception still today that private brands, own brands, whatever you call them, private label, are not really proper brands. I started my career with a really big multinational that had brands for hundreds of years. But what you've just described is actually classic branding. You didn't just go and design a logo, stick it on a pack. And I think that's a really interesting part of the movement and the change in branding from being the territory of the big brands like your Nestle's, your Unilevers, your Procter & Gamble's, Coca-Cola's. There is a change. And if I can just personalise it, so I want to ask you about one of the brands that I bought in Bunnings. So I went and bought a barbecue a couple of months ago. There's a couple of brands there, but I happened to end up with a brand called Matador. I didn't know anything about it. I bought it, and it's a good enough barbecue. I'm really happy with it. Tell us a story about Matador.
Yeah, Bunnings already had an existing brand called Jumbuck, been around since I had joined. I actually worked at the old McEwen's, and then which turned to Bunnings, and then became a consultant to Bunnings over a number of different projects. And there was a need to not just occupy the entry price point, but also have something that was better or could have more features. And we wrote a story about this as we created the brand name Matador, and that would have come from a suggestion out of the creative process where it had to be very authentic. It had to speak to what you end up doing, which is cooking a lot of steak and sausage, and so it even had a subline in Spanish that was called the Deluxe Edition or something, and which may have been lost now. I'm not too sure. But to your question about home brands, are they just people see them as cheap? But not every. Most stuff that we see on shelves in Australia aren't made in Australia. So you can rule out the fact that you don't make it. It doesn't mean you're not able to produce a brand, because there's lots of brands that we know that are national brands in Australia who are importing products. We don't make as much in Australia as we used to, yet we try and call supplier brands as brands, and then if the retailer's undertaking the same thing, well, they're not brands, they're just these private labels. Well, they're just intellectual property that you choose to apply, and how much rigour you apply, whether you import them or make them, I think is immaterial. And I think in the likes of, I've had experience with Mitre 10 and Bunnings and Terrawhite Chemmart and others, where if you're authentic about going about it, not just producing a packaging solution, engaging a proper design studio to undertake and force you through a process. I wasn't the creative person, Richard's team was. I was more the business side. What comes out is something that endures.
Yeah, I think on that, Shane and Roy, and you'd understand this completely, Roy, it's the strategic positioning and where the business wants, the business plan is for the particular product. How does it all fit, and orchestrating that across a range, but also the power of identity and design to actually express that. But the other aspect about it is that most of these private label brands invented them themselves. I mean, they're competing in a marketplace. They put new things on, put different SKUs on it. There's something, a pair of shears, for example, might have some other actual additional detail to separate it from the traditional. So the whole thing is a creative act to be able to actually sort of keep themselves relevant, but also muscle in on the status quo.
Well, talking about muscling in, we developed a brand in bathroom products called Mondella. It was actually another brand prior to that, but it ended up turning into Mondella and got registered as Mondella. And the execution of the packaging and the livery and the hierarchy of information and the colour palette and the various colour segues, whether it was a tap or sink or whatever. It actually, when it was executed, it showed off that some of the competitors, the leading brands, be it Caroma or Dorf or some of those brands that we know as brands, it actually made them look a bit tired and old and probably forced them to rejuvenate themselves, because what Bunnings got as an outcome of the process they took, I took and Richard took them through, was a very contemporary, forward-looking brand.
And this is all about thinking and creativity, creating commercial advantage. It's all about value add. It's all about the end success of the brand. Because in a place or a company like Bunnings, if you don't survive, if you can't actually create a customer return on investment, that brand falls away.
Yes, and to come back to Roy's comment about the barbecue he bought 4 weeks ago, is what helps is a $20 billion retailer selling it. So when you've got a very large retailer like Bunnings, who's, it's got shelf space and it's got marketing and it's got, some customer support and it's got 4 or 5 or 8 different barbecues, it becomes, before you know it, a leading barbecue brand in Australia because of the scale of the operator.
Mm. So just on the business side, so you've referred to the internal working of how you created the brands, the creative side. I'm interested to delve into the business side of it. So I think a lot of people in business, let's go to the finance director says, all these branding people, they waste money, they're creative, they don't deliver anything, I don't really get it. But bottom line benefit. So just come back to the Bunnings organisation of today. I'll ask the question in 2 parts. One, from a consumer side, if I walk through Bunnings today, what percentage of the brands belong to Bunnings? And secondly, if I'm the finance director of Bunnings, how do I feel about them? Why am I happy with them? Are they more profitable? Have they got more buying power for you? What is the business benefit? And to what level has it penetrated through the Bunnings store? Because I don't think the average consumer, I didn't know Matador was a private brand. Didn't need to know. I'm happy with the barbecue. So what percentage of brands in Bunnings belong to Bunnings? And what's the bottom line benefit of what Bunnings have done?
Good question. Firstly, I don't speak for Bunnings. So
I understand.
I was a previous consultant to them and an employee.
But you're an expert in the field.
But I do have some insights without giving away any proprietary information. The answer is a very small percentage. So Bunnings would probably carry 40, 60,000 different products in their store, thousands of brands, and there'd be 10 or maybe up to 30 of their own. Some of them might be on 3 or 4 products. Others might be on a wide range. But often there's often a void that needed to be filled. So, I don't know a brand really of outdoor furniture. So Bunnings need to create one. There's not, what's a brand of a mid-level barbecue? Well, we don't make barbecues in Australia. There isn't a Weber here like in North America where there's got a heritage of making barbecues. So, the need to create a brand is often to fill a void. So to answer the other part of your question, how would someone from a financial perspective look at this? Firstly, from my understanding, Bunnings is very much they support branded brands. So the private label or their own brand or their suite of brands is to support delivering value to their customers, and that is predominantly around their own import program. So I'd imagine their own import program is quite profitable. There's some costs associated with it. You got to store more stock than you're comfortable with. You probably need to manage the returns yourself. You've got to discontinue products yourself. You're not leaning on a local supplier who can help you transition ranges. But I think that would be a profitable part of their business.
And the supplier, one of the benefits of having a supplier brand is they pay for the marketing. In the case of private brands, it's going to be funded by the retailer, yep.
Yeah, and private label haven't typically been great marketers. I mean, now that Coles has got Coles as their brand, that any marketing they're doing rubs off to the product. But I think in the past you'll find that Matador has sponsored the cricket, and Matador had a program behind it. So I think some brands have had marketing support and others haven't. But to your point, traditionally, the suite of brands in a retailer are not very well marketed.
Coming back to the ABC, who got it wrong in my view, I totally agree with you. There was a premise in there that because Bunnings have got so many of their own brands, they're sort of making it impossible for customers to deliver the price promise, because price matching, the rule is you got to have exactly the same product in another store. And clearly there's no Matador barbecues in Mitre 10. And it was almost like the interviewer was saying, well, this is a cop-out. The Bunnings are using private label to sort of not deliver on the price promise. But there's only a handful of brands in a Bunnings that belong to them. So I just didn't, and I know a little bit about private brands. So I think that the business benefit clearly is there. There's definitely a customer benefit, but they haven't taken away the option of the customer have choice. There's still a lot of choice in a Bunnings.
Yeah, and I agree. I think when Bunnings arrived on the scene some 25 years ago, when the first Sunshine store was opened in, I think, 93, maybe a bit longer than that, they brought a price promise and authenticity to Australian retail landscape that no one had ever done. It was an everyday low price. It was a genuine and authentic attempt to provide competitive prices, so it wasn't going to be discounted tomorrow. You could buy it today, not worried that tomorrow it was half price. To go back to ABC, where they claimed that Bunnings had used their price match guarantee in association with the private label, I think that was nitpicking. I think Bunnings are authentic about what they do. In the event that there was a sign of a price match guarantee near a private label, that's just an executional issue. I don't think they've deliberately gone out to mislead customers. The private label is there to deliver exceptional value. The price match guarantee helps with the other side of the business, which is branded products. The fact that those two collided in one store on a particular day, I think is just an executional issue, and Bunnings will do better. That's my bad, yeah.
Now let's come back, bring it back into creativity, Shane. The fact is that change, and I think Bunnings is continually evolving because of the marketplace. Bunnings is now a place of community. They are centre points for people to connect, to talk, to feel, touch, feel, taste with the sausage sizzle, etc. A morning out for their products, but also Bunnings provides opportunities for new entries into the market. As long as they fulfil obviously the business and strategic criteria that you guys are talking about, there's still opportunities for creativity, innovation, new presentations, new presentation styles within a traditional homemaker type environment. So I think that there's a great lot of good that a store like Bunnings does in terms of promoting innovation and new thinking. And this is where I think there is a big change, because as we go more digital, people want to be together with each other. They want to have that. I mean, I've just done an article about a community of they become like town squares, where you go there, you see a lot of different things. That this is where the stories come in. So you go to in the same environment like Bunnings, you go to the outdoor area, you go to the gardening area, you go to the nuts and bolts, you go to the timber area. They've all got different people or different styles. And that's how Bunnings use creativity and innovation and compelling messaging to have a connection with the customer. I think it's a fact. I think private label also allows a new set of stories to come up that have their own stories, and within the Bunnings environment, I think it's quite an exciting ongoing development.
So moving out of the hardware category for a moment, and you've got a broad knowledge of this whole topic of private label. Which other retailers or categories of retail do you see that private label are really becoming a key part of the business, much in the way you've described, for Bunnings? Which other retailers maybe in Australia are driving this? What's your observation about how successful they are? And how does it differ maybe than how you went about it with Bunnings?
I think all of them. You got to take a country road, or country road is a branded country road, and their merchandise is country road, all of it. There's some retailers, particularly in apparel, that their merchandise is branded, obviously the same name as their retail outlet, because the way they're going to deliver their look and feel and their cut and style and colour palette and size variation is they're going to choose what to do, and they're not waiting for a group of Australian apparel suppliers to tell them what's available. They've taken control, and I think if you took the examples that I work closely with, like a Bunnings and an Officeworks, those particular two, what happened with those two? They were category killers. So they ended up having wide ranges. All of a sudden, Bunnings comes into home improvement, wide range. Officeworks, wide range. Well, to give consumers choice within a category, whether it's pens, stationery, whatever, where are the brands to carry? You have to create them. How do you give consumers choice by this category killer? And you'll find the same with a Chemist Warehouse. They'll have a series of their own brands because they've got this wide range philosophy at lowest prices, and there's not all these brands just sitting there waiting for someone to range them.
And then when you have those wide ranges of brands, Shane, you've also got to have differentiation. So, the same could be basically the same outcome of the product, but there's something about that product that speaks to me and I'm attracted to. That's through the creative connection and the emotional connection with the brand.
Yeah, and I also think that the capability of retailers has grown. Their ability to import products, brand products. I mean, if you're not the top player in a category, you're at real risk of losing shelf space by the retailer undertaking their own development. And you can see that in supermarkets. Really, there's a lot of brands that we would have grown up with that are not on the shelves anymore because they weren't differentiated. They were maybe lazy, didn't add enough value, and the retailer could do it themselves and add equal value.
Let's say on that, though, they weren't differentiated but could have gone and done and been differentiated, but they sort of thought comfortably that they've got this amount of ownership with the customer's mind. But as soon as you put something next to it on a shelf where there's no additional support except for the product on the shelf, then you're at the behest of what the customer's actually been learning, listening and feeling about it. It's the same with, say, petrol stations, for example. There's the story, petrol stations are petrol stations, but there's going to be some emotional connection with a station besides just being right there when you're running out of petrol.
Yeah.
But a choice of where do you have your flybys.
You've got to decommoditise it.
Exactly. You've got to actually have a relationship.
Yeah.
Shane, I'm interested also to get your view on Australia. In this area, we're talking about Australia is at a certain point in its evolution. I have my own view about where it is. How do you think we rate internationally? So you've got plenty of countries, let's take Europe as a whole bunch, the US, what's happening in China. How do we rate internationally in terms of being really good at private label?
I think we're excellent. I think Australia is very strong. If you took an Officeworks and put that in North America, I think it'd do exceptionally well. I think a Bunnings Warehouse would stand its own, whether it was in North America or other countries, just because of the value proposition being strong. I think a Chemist Warehouse would do exceptionally well around the world, and is. They've opened in New Zealand, they're in Ireland, I think they've opened in Dubai. I think that, we're not a land of manufacturing anymore. That probably has gone and may not come back in certain categories. Certainly in the centre of a Bunnings store, we don't make much anymore.
So part of that there, Shane, too, of course, is you have to fight a lot harder in Australia because of the size of the population and the market share that you have from the customer. So their ability, their wallet size. So I think Australians, I'm a very proud Australian designer because I think everyone in this country, if they're any good at what they do, has to work very, very hard to exist in a very, very competitive marketplace with a narrow a number of eyeballs looking at your product.
I think the UK supermarkets have led very strongly over the years. They've just been very good at what they do when it comes to their own brand and the quality levels that they were positioned. They were always, at a high level. I think Marks and Spencer had St Michael's or something like that, and Sainsbury's and those all had, and Tesco all had programs. So it was excellent.
Yeah. I think that's a really good, one of the key takeouts that I've already summarised in my own mind, because the audience out there is saying, well, you know what we normally do in Australia is we get on planes and we go to Europe seeking the answer, and we go and visit all the retailers in the US. Well, that's not where you want to be anymore. You can go to China and have a look, but I think there's a lot of homegrown advantage, if I can call it that. So our audience is mostly Australian businesses. Increasingly, it'll be Asian as well. But I think there's a point, a very strong point there, that if you have a problem right now with brand, and maybe you think private label or own brand could be an answer, don't get in a plane and go to London. In this podcast series, we're trying to do exactly this, to bring you into a better knowledge of what Australia is already doing. That's why I asked you how we're rating. I'll just add one little personal observation from my side. Our company has been doing private label in Vietnam. And where do they learn from? And why did we win the work? It's because we're from Australia. And they come to Australia and walk around Coles and Woolies and say, how do you guys do this? They used to use agencies from London or Singapore or whatever. I think the export that we now have of, let's call it branding knowledge from Australia, it's an export commodity.
This is good to hear. I think companies would do well to have an audit by maybe a third party, for someone else to come in and say, how's this look? Because I think what happens is you might develop a brand of barbecues with a story and a style guide and product differentiation. So you might say that there's Jumbuck and Matador. You say, well, Jumbuck's got to have 1 year warranty, Matador's 5. Jumbuck doesn't come with a cover, Matador comes with a free cover, or these burners got one button to ignite it, but the Matador must have, each one has its own igniter, or it will only use a cast iron grill on a Matador, but this can be sort of a forged steel, whatever it is. Over time, those merchandise differentiations for the brand, that can fall away because buyers change. Those things that you differentiate on have moved on because life changes. And retailers are good at executing on brands, but aren't great in keeping the authenticity going. And because buyers change, direction change, funds change, urgency can change. You might need to get that barbecue out quite quickly, you're running late, and you put a sticker on it. Well, that sticker is a very different intent than a full colour artwork on something that was meant to be very different. Now, I'm not critical of Bunnings, and that hasn't happened at Bunnings. I'm just suggesting that retailers don't then, as they do this, invest in brand managers and product managers and behave like they're curating brands like you would in a Procter & Gamble or a Dulux or so forth. So those audits can be a healthy way of having a bit of a mirror to say, well, have we drifted? How are we doing?
That's probably also because the truth of that brand didn't grow from the starting point. So the tree that grows into a large, blossoming brand, had no owner, had no, father or mother of that brand. So I think
that's fabricated authenticity.
But you can also, though, someone can be the ambassador for that brand and ensure that it's nurtured and it's measured and it can compete. So that I think that's a very important consideration when you think of these of brands and how they're competing nowadays. And if you go to say an alcohol distributor, you go in there, the number of brands that you think have have a long heritage, and you can go right back like a Penfolds or something like that is this deep. It could be up against something else, which is from potentially another thing. It looks exactly like it's Penfolds. It looks exactly at the sort of the credibility of it through design and creativity and imagination and some innovation on it. But in actual fact, it was only brought into the store 2 years ago. So it's a very interesting dynamic that's happening out there.
And there's been a proliferation in brands in that category, with whether it's Dan Murphy or the other competing brands having their own suite of alcoholic brands, with not just spirits and beer, within beer, whether it's draft or lager, and within that, whether it's light or heavy, they have a sophisticated brand portfolio.
Just interesting to reflect on some of the other retailers, Australian retailers. So Coles, for example, I have heard that the private label team is a team of 200 people. They have many, many brands that you wouldn't know are necessarily own brand or private label. But the one thing about the reason to use brand in the first place, any brand, is it gives that customer some level of trust. When you see a brand that you've mentioned it before, Bunnings has got a lot of corporate muscle. You see a brand in a store called Bunnings, it's going to be a good quality brand. If it fails, they'll take it back. How do you see private label in terms of fully sort of immersed inside the company itself? So Richard and I often talk about, step one of brand is actually internal alignment and values and probably culture to some degree. So, for example, if you buy a brand from a known supplier, their problem to have the lab and the quality testing and whatever. Do retailers really have the capability to do their own quality assurance checking? Because especially if you're looking at food, if I'm going to put a private label meal into my family, into my mouth, how do I know that it's not just a pretty brand? What goes behind the scenes that the consumer wouldn't even know about? And maybe these companies don't even talk about it to make sure that brand and quality goes together. How does that work?
So I think it's a challenge, and I think if you reflect back on the old Target that used to exist in Geelong, when it was a leading discounter, but it had the Target merchandise in their store, that product was seen as exceptional quality, internal product management capabilities, compliance capabilities, testing capabilities. If you bought a bit of Target apparel back, I don't know, maybe the late 90s, you had a lot of confidence in it. And the organisation had structured themselves for many years to produce that. Now, I don't think that that's the case everywhere, but to hear that Coles have 200-odd people, it doesn't surprise me. I don't know if that's a big number or a small number, considering it could be a multi-billion-dollar program that they're running to support the Coles brand.
You look at that number of people, and you look at the quality of the products coming out of both Coles and Woolworths, if you like, then if they're home brand, the quality of design, the quality of execution, the quality of imagery, etc., is a global best practice. So they're actually responding to a client needs to say they want the quality look, but maybe at a slightly lower price point or whatever. But their design and imagination fitting into a brand strategy becomes incredibly important.
I also think if you're going to put your store brand on merchandise, you're going to call a plastic bag or whatever the Coles product is, Coles. I think what comes with that inherently is a greater responsibility, because
it's your name. It's your name.
That is the store name. That is the trust that you've spent 20, 30 years building as a store brand, which comes down to the service, the lighting, the advertising, the layout. Someone's bought into brand. You can't then go and produce something with that name on it that doesn't deliver value, which is why, more of a hard goods retailer, like a Bunnings or an Officeworks or a Mitre 10, even a TerraWhite Chemmart, having a brand portfolio that doesn't have the store name, if you don't have that resource attached to it, might be a safer bet.
Yeah, and you haven't spent the millions and probably in some cases billions of dollars on building your reputation through media and communications and the experience that you have at those stores.
And also, how can one brand, let's take an Officeworks, be on a printer, on a pen, on paper, on a rubber band, and how can it mean all those things? It's got to mean durability here, efficiency here, technology here, over here. It's got to be nice, appealing, and fashion. How can one brand straddle all those elements? Which is why my preference, and I think apparel is very different. Apparel retailers traditionally branded their product to marry with their merchandise. But in a hard goods retailer, how can a bit of timber and a sharp knife be the same brand as a cushion or some paint?
Just coming back to that makes me think of Amazon. Amazon with 650 million products, up to 2 million brands. Amazon have around 200 own brands. And their strategy, it's a bit like you said before, there's a gap. And they've got their 650 million products. But when Amazon see a gap and they don't have a brand in a particular segment or for a particular range of product, they develop one. Not because they're trying to put somebody out of business, but there is a gap. So that's a really strong part of Amazon's profitability at the moment. You know, their scale is huge. 200 brands, you wouldn't know. By and large, you wouldn't know which ones belong to them.
And I don't think that's deceptive.
No, it's not at all.
Think
It's actually it's good for the customer.
Tried to claim that as being deceptive and disingenuous. I think providing a product to a customer with a brand that works with the product, with information hierarchy that is sensible for that category, that's not misleading. That's doing them a service.
I think also on that too, Shane, just to counter what we're talking about in terms of the larger retailers, there's also places like Uniqlo and Muji who basically have as their core, at their core essence is the fact that it's a designed, product. It has a particular culture. It has a particular tribe that would go there. There's a particular person that would actually purchase from that. But the power of those brands, its authenticity, but also its designed outcomes. It's a different from the when the big visions out here for those brands, very tough competition for those big retailers like Coles and, as you mentioned, Officeworks. When you get down to the smaller ones, they actually determine exactly what's their persona, what is the offer, and you know that's where you want to go. But you also know that whatever you buy from there, like as if you go to IKEA, you have an IKEA type product because that's their discipline of the way they want to talk. That's the decision they've made on purpose, but also how they express themselves in a designed environment.
Well, I think, Shane, it's been fascinating listening to the stories, your experience with this particular type of branding. I'm getting a very clear signal that this isn't pretend brand, this is real. I know personally that there's a huge movement towards private label. It's being done very differently. It's being done very professionally. So if there's people out there watching and listening to the podcast, we always like to finish these sessions with a bit of here's one thing you should do. So in other words, out there's a CEO or a founder, maybe somebody that started a business online. What's the one or two things you would say, do this tomorrow? Don't wait. Don't hire an agency. What are the actionable points? Let's call it takeout. So do something. If you're in a car listening now, this is what you need to do today. What would those? What would the one or two things be?
While Shane's thinking about that, let's add the other ideas. If you were doing it again and you were learning, what was going to be? If something was whispered in your ear, what is it that actually sort of made the journey so different, and what could people learn from that, as Roy said, about going forward in the new marketplace?
So I think start with the customer first. If you're a retailer, walk your store with a customer lens and have a look critically at how your merchandise is presented and the offer you're giving a customer. Are you giving them a leading brand? Are you giving them a good, better, best? Are you giving them brand width in the range? and see if what you're offering them is sensible and fulfilling a need. And if not, I'm not sure you can rely on a supplier base to do it for you. If they haven't already, you might need to take some control and say, well, we could actually do this, this, and this ourselves. Now, the category needs to be sizable enough to make that investment to go about doing it. And if you haven't got the skills, you might need to bring in some skills to do so. So I start with the customer's lens and walk through a store. And to your point, Richard, if I was doing it all again with a new challenge, I think I'd probably do the same. I'd start with what's the category, what are the needs of the category, how well has that been attended to, where's the failures or the holes, maybe a competitive look at the landscape, and the void will, the gap or the opportunity will materialise through that.
When we've been talking about your engagement, what's your thoughts about when you start realising you're running behind time? Is that too late? Can you catch up? Can you use?
Well, my role was always develop the strategy. Often when I was engaged, the problem that they had was very different to their perceived problem. There's often a lot of internal views that need to be managed and massaged, and you got to become a very good storyteller within an organisation to corral everyone together around, hey, we're going to do this and this is why. And my output, that was my input, my output was to get a brief to a company like Richard's that could interpret that and respond to it.
And in terms of that too, Shane, I think our experience is that once you've got the structure right, you've actually answered the business problem, and then you put creative in front of someone who, as you said, there are many agendas. Actually, the heart follows the mind. Then people just see it all. It becomes something that they can own, they can feel, they can trust, but they can also be inspired to. And they say, I like that. Now, that's the power of the creative and the imagination in converting business strategies into brand strategy and then brand fulfillment for the customer.
Yeah, agree.
But just on a more sort of helpful note, and we're about to wrap up, and I just wanted to say thanks, Shane, for your time today, and Richard for joining in the conversation. You've been on Brandr. It's a series. This is one particular topic, but we're going to make it really easy for you to reach out. There'll be socials. There's going to be a landing page. We want to hear from the audience. If you don't know who to talk to, give us a call. Contact us and we'll put you in the hands of somebody that can look after you or show you where to look. There's great examples in Australia. There's great talent. Maybe not always easy to find in Google or AI. So we want the audience to be part of this. So thanks again, Shane. This has been just a small lifting of the lid on a huge topic, but really appreciate your time today. And thanks to you guys out there listening and watching. You've been on Brandr.
And if you can beat the story of Shane out there in the marketplace, we'll beat it by 10%.